Hi folks, I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm on the Iwate Peninsula here in Miyako City, and unbelievably today marks 1 year that I have been in Japan. I can't believe it myself. So I thought that I would actually take a bit of a hike today to explore somewhere which pretty much most days of my life here in Miyako I have looked out upon. Today I'm going to climb up a mountain here on the Iwate Peninsula. And I'm going to tell you a few things about how this year has gone and how I'm looking forward to what the next year will bring. Some of this video is very much from the heart. I've ummed and ahed about how best to put this video together, to be honest with you, whether I should speak from a script or whether I should just give you practical advice. But I thought it would be more interesting actually just to tell you how this year has gone and maybe how I've dealt with some of the things that I've encountered here, but how ultimately the things are looking extremely positive for the next year. So let's crack on with the hike. So I don't think I've ever really properly explained about where I actually live in Japan. So I live in Iwate Prefecture in the northeast of Japan, a region which is known as Tohoku, which just basically means northeast. It's on the main island of Japan, Honshu, and yeah, it's pretty remote as you can see. In fact, perhaps where I live is not what first comes to your mind when you think of Japan. You're probably thinking of things like the grounds around the Imperial Palace of Kyoto and the skyscrapers and sights and sounds of Tokyo with 24-hour nightlife and all of Akihabara with all of its anime and video gaming and popular culture and neon signs and all that kind of stuff. Iwate is very different. In fact, a lot of Japan is very different to the image that you may conjure up in your mind. So I knew full well that Miyako City was going to be quite a remote area when I first moved here. However, it's been even more remote than I imagined, just purely because of the time it actually takes to get to places. The nearest city to here is Sendai, which is about maybe 3.5 hours away by car, as it were, so it's a little distance. However, I do have Morioka City around about 2 hours away, which is handy because obviously that's where most of the things like cinemas and shopping malls and so forth are. Not that even if I had those on my doorstep, I'd been able to enjoy those this year because obviously we have had that awful pandemic. So I guess the big question is how has life in Japan been for the past year since I moved here? Well, I have to say it's definitely been a lot of fun at times, but at times it's also been quite hard. But mostly it has been an amazing experience which I'm just looking forward to continuing. But I can't hide from the truth that there have been times where it has been very hard. Things such as the language barrier, which I knew were going to be a big issue, have turned out to be even harder to overcome, and I'm not even really near overcoming it in its entirety, have been difficult to deal with at times. It has meant that, because obviously, as most of us have experienced this year, the pandemic has greatly reduced our social contact with people, and so that means that many of the things that would have happened this year, such as festivals or just meeting up with people to go for a drink in the evening or going to the cinema or doing some karaoke or just having food together, it just really hasn't happened. Occasionally I've been able to enjoy a bit of food with some of the people that I have met here. There's been few and far between. In fact, it took basically a year for me to be able to enjoy doing any karaoke at all, and that only happened because somebody had basically booked a bar just purely for a private function, so that only the people who were invited could come in. It wasn't obviously a public occasion, shall we say, but it was a great deal of fun. But the language barrier has meant that it has been quite difficult at times. But on the upside, that has meant that it has really forced me to knuckle down on my Japanese study, because quite frankly, I really needed it. I came here pretty much able to read hiragana. I was able to read in the main katakana, although it still proves to be difficult as you try and work out what on earth is this word in English, and then you realise that it hasn't even come from English in the first place. But yes, it's definitely spurred me on to really work on my language skills. Amazingly, after only 7 months of being here in Japan, through the help of some of the amazing people that I have met here in Miyako City, I was able to pass the very basic Japanese proficiency test, which is known as just JLPT, and the N5 level is basically what, by the skin of my teeth, I actually passed. I think the thing that's really worked for me is just making sure that every day I study and review kanji, review vocabulary, and actually work through the textbook making notes and actually making use of that language on a daily basis, quite frankly. If you don't use the language, then you'll never learn how to speak it. I make tons of mistakes every day with the language, but gradually I learn how to actually say things correctly, shall we say, or near as damn it, and it's really helped things. The ability to occasionally strike up a completely spontaneous conversation which isn't centred around me describing at great lengths how bad my Japanese is has been really liberating. It's allowed me to build a few very small but significant connections in the local community. Last weekend, or the weekend before, there was a speech contest here in Miyako. Now, I have helped some of the high school students here with speeches that they have obviously written in English, and coached them on their speech contest performances and so forth, as well as editing their scripts here. And it seemed that I have to live by the sword, shall we say. If I'm trying to encourage my students to speak as much as possible and to use the language and try and really push themselves, then I should also be doing the same, setting a good example. But also mostly because I really wanted to do it. And I was encouraged to take part in the speech contest. There were 3 topics. You could talk about yourself, which I didn't really want to. A little bit too, just didn't really fit well with me. Another topic was like, what would you take back from Japan to your home country, and as a souvenir or something that you would like to see perhaps in your own country. And the other topic was what you find interesting about Iwate and Miyako. So I spoke about that from the perspective of the impact of what learning more about the Higashi Nihon Daishinsai, the Great East Japan Earthquake of 2011, has taught me, and what I have learned as a result of that. But I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But yes, it was scary as hell doing this speech contest, having to memorise 3 pages of Japanese, some of which was completely new grammar and so forth to me, but amazingly I somehow managed to win the 2nd place position. I was pretty stunned at that, to say the least. I had no idea that I would be anywhere near consideration. I did fluff the odd line, I did forget the odd line, but I managed to pull it back during the speech. So yeah, it's unbelievable to think that with, well, a year in Japan that I was able to do that and able to communicate a message that was very much from my heart. So hopefully this coming year I can just continue to improve my Japanese and hopefully become a little bit more fluent and a bit more confident with it. I've certainly come a very long way in the past year. When I came here, as I say, I could just about read hiragana and katakana. I could say hello, thank you, excuse me, and sorry. That was pretty much it. Yeah, it took me a long time to actually really start to feel like I was making proper inroads with the language. I guess perhaps if you're a younger person or an older person that's gone to university and studied Japanese for a number of years, a lot of these things will hopefully not be as difficult. But certainly for myself, coming with basically only a 20-week, 1 night a week community college course that I went to, it wasn't enough. But yes, the immersion does help. You can constantly listen to the language, but yes, immersion alone won't crack it for you. It's like any language, you've got to start using it, and admittedly it's difficult when perhaps you live in a country that doesn't speak Japanese. But yeah, I feel like that big challenge is not overcome, far from it. I have a very long way to go, but it's one that's getting easier with each and every day, and it means that Japan is beginning to open up a lot more to me as a result of it. So yes, even though it has been hard, it's been really good as well. In terms of the experience of the actual job that I'm doing, the day job, let's not forget it, it's been very enjoyable. I have to say some of the approaches to teaching English in Japan don't necessarily chime with my own perspective of how language should be taught or approached, shall we say. Sometimes there doesn't seem to be any real focus on actually speaking the language, but all the same, I have really enjoyed it, and there have been so many memorable sort of classes that I've been in and so forth, and I only wish that I'd done this a lot sooner, to be honest with you. The work has been just wonderful, working with the the youngsters from as little as like 6 years old or so, all the way up to about 15 years of age. So yeah, I've really enjoyed the work, and yeah, even though perhaps my longer term ambitions won't be to be an ALT, an assistant English teacher, for all of my life, of course, I have found the actual job itself just a lot of fun, quite frankly. Each day is a little bit different, and that's quite a good thing. I certainly don't have the stress that I used to in my old career path, so I can't recommend the experience enough, to be honest with you. So I need to talk a little bit more about some of the other aspects, some of the less tangible aspects of living in another country with a language that you can barely speak, that perhaps are a little overlooked at times, and maybe this was something that I overlooked. Something that I have definitely learnt in the past year or so since arriving in Japan is that frankly, what I thought I knew about life, I didn't really know much at all. I've been quite humbled by the experience, actually, to be honest with you. I've realised that perhaps what I felt I knew about life, what I thought was up and what was down, was really just based on the repeated daily activities of the life that I had before, the previous career path, the previous things that I used to do, and so forth. And so all those things that I just thought were, oh, that's just the way it is and that's how you deal with them, turned out they were just basically things that were to do with my old life in a way. So it's been quite humbling, actually, learning new things about how to deal with situations, particularly the one to do with isolation. As so many this year with the various lockdowns due to corona have experienced, isolation is something that after an extended period of time definitely weighs heavy on the mind. I know that this weighed heavy on my mind, and I was still able to go out to a place of work pretty much every day of the week. So I don't want to labour the point too much as oh poor me, but I've certainly found that sometimes with being unable to really communicate with the language and so forth, that I was kind of living in a silence, even in the classrooms where most of the English lesson would be conducted in English, and sometimes my contributions would be minimal, particularly to start with as I was learning the job and so forth. It's very easy to kind of almost tune out of everything that's happening around you because you just realise you can't understand, and sometimes you find your thoughts have drifted off deep into your mind. It's quite a difficult thing to try and tackle, that is actually to remain actively focused on what's being said around you. After all, you know, that's how I'm going to learn the language. But certainly with, you know, month after month of not really having any real conversation with people on a, you know, even a weekly basis. In fact, I could argue that perhaps I've never really had a huge amount of conversation until the last month or two, to be honest with you here. It's been challenging at times to get used to that. I don't think that I'll ever entirely get used to it because I'm naturally quite a sociable person, so I'm looking forward to hopefully some of the restrictions that we've had during this awful pandemic will begin to get eased. So I've definitely found that quite difficult to cope with at times. In fact, I feel that some of it may have played out a little bit on social media, which is why I've essentially removed myself from a lot of it, because it was just fueling certain feelings in me at times that were just not healthy at all and just not really the way that things were. So it's definitely been a humbling experience getting used to some of the things that I've felt and experienced since I moved here to Japan. I guess it goes to show that it doesn't matter how old you are, you're always learning in life, aren't you? So I guess that's a good thing in a way. I also want to talk a little bit about something that has occurred to me in the process of basically moving my life forwards, about this idea of living the dream. Some people might say, well, you live in Japan and you're living the dream. And I suppose on the surface, yeah, I guess that kind of makes sense. But the problem with dreams is, well, I think there are two problems with dreams. The first and most obvious one, quite literally, is that one day you're going to wake up from a dream and what you'll be left with is reality. And you have to be aware that a dream doesn't go on forever. You know, you have to adjust to the reality of the situation around you. And the sooner you're able to do that, the better, really, quite frankly, because then you'll appreciate life for what it is rather than what you hope it to be and so forth. It's important to enjoy the moment, I think. And so I think that's the first thing I would say about dreams, is that yes, they don't go on forever. You have to find a way to be able to find something that you enjoy, or find eye-opening or just comforting, maybe not on a daily basis, but something that is enough to sustain you in life. And the second problem with dreams, as far as I'm concerned, is that you have no control over them. When you're dreaming, basically your mind will go any which direction. You have no control over what happens. And the problem with just relying on living your dreams and so forth is that ultimately there is no control over it. You end up basically begrudging the everyday that's around you because you feel like there should be something else. The thing that I think you should focus on living instead is living for the future. And this somewhat plays into why the subject or title of my forthcoming manga is called Future Saviours. But the future is something that you can bank on, largely. Hopefully tomorrow morning I will wake up and there'll be a new day. And basically it's better to pin your hopes and thoughts and where you want to go in life on working towards the future and so forth, rather than thinking that certain things can only happen in dreams or it requires some magical sort of intervention, shall we say. It's much better to focus on what you can control, and to a large extent, if you're brave enough in life and you have a little bit of luck and fortune, as in, you know, maybe the money to be able to make a big change like I did in my life, albeit the only reason I had the money in the first place is because I worked all the hours under the sun to do this. But I think you can be in control a lot more of your future than you can be in your dreams. So I'm always a little bit wary of that phrase, you must be living your dream. Yeah, I guess maybe to start with it was, but at some point the dream has to stop, and all that you can then rely upon and work towards is the future. So I just want to talk a little bit more about my time actually here in Miyako, because ultimately that's where I live at the moment. And I have to say that the people that I have met and made friends with here have been some of the most kind and generous-hearted people that I've ever met in my life. It seems as if they will do anything to kind of help you, and it's kind of spurred me on to hopefully be that good a friend back. In fact, it's actually one of the main reasons that I decided that I wasn't going to try somewhere new in Japan this coming school or academic year. I wanted to basically continue those friendships and be able to hopefully give something back. So I have to say that whilst maybe the social calendar has been, well, pretty much empty, the actual people, when I have been able to meet up with them at the Japanese conversation group that happens most Mondays here, it really has made the experience of living here amazing. I'm sure it's the same in many parts of Japan. The people here are incredibly welcoming, and I've had nothing but, well, kindness from the minute I stepped off that plane a year ago. I'll always remember that time when I got in to Narita airport and made it through with only hours to spare before Japan closed its borders and made my visa invalid. In fact, actually 1 year to the day, that's still the case. So it was something that really struck me when I was travelling through Tokyo and I had the big suitcase and this rucksack on my back, and it was hard work because obviously I hadn't slept at all, and you know, basically I'd flown obviously from Heathrow, changed planes in Bangkok and took the onward flight to Narita, so I had been awake for well over 24 hours by this stage, and I was just taken aback at just how kind people were with helping me with my luggage up steps when there wasn't an elevator available. It was, well, again, that word, humbling. And people haven't stopped being wonderful and kind the whole time I've been here. So I'm definitely very grateful for that. In fact, it's told me, or taught me a lot of things about the way that I deal with situations and people that I hope to be able to continue wherever ever I find myself in life, I guess. So yes, Miyako has been wonderful. Maybe one day I will move to another location in Japan. You know, maybe I will move to the far south of Kyushu. I quite like the idea of perhaps one day of living somewhere like Kagoshima or Miyazaki again. But nonetheless, it has been a wonderful experience, what contact I have had with people here. Maybe it's a little bit different in the cities, I can't really say. But certainly, the Japanese people have really lived up to their reputation of being very kind-hearted and generous. I think I've learnt something else quite important whilst being here, and it's something that I've been vaguely aware of for a few years now, and that's how I think I've spent too much of my life planning ideas for the future. As I say, it's important to live for the future, but you can sometimes look a bit too far forwards and not really enjoy the moment. In some ways, I'm looking forward to the day where hopefully I can be a bit more trite or a bit more superficial about things rather than thinking about them too deeply. But that's just the way I am. But when I finished my own business and so forth, I remember having a conversation with one of my brothers and his girlfriend when I was in London. They were saying, well, you know, obviously you've stopped your own business now. You're doing the day job as I was then. And I think at this point I was either a year away from applying to live and work in Japan, but I was certainly mindful that it was something that was on the cards. And they asked me, well, you know, yeah, what are you going to do? You know, you obviously don't like doing your current day job. Where does life go from here? Or maybe what projects will you work on and so forth? And I said, well, I'd rather not think too much about it. I'd rather just enjoy the moment for what it is and just see what happens. A lot of what happened was obviously doing YouTube, which has been really good to me actually overall. And you know, obviously very much a pixel art emphasis to start with, but of course obviously that's expanded out, so in some respects, yes, I have seen exactly where life would take me, I suppose, in that regard. But also, sometimes I have thought, well, in 2 to 3 years time I could be doing this and I could be doing that and the other. But again, the only problem with that is that I was forgetting to live in the moment and maybe get started on something just because there never is a good time to start something. And that's where my future, well, hopeful future path in illustration comes in. There's no point beating about the bush. I'm an incredibly lapsed artist. Well, certainly was anyway. I feel like I'm certainly making amends for it now. But there's no way that I was going to be able to start a career in illustration without strengthening my own skills. And for the longest time in the run to moving to Japan, I was very much thinking that after maybe 3 or 4 years of doing the ALT thing, if it worked out, then I would like to go to a technical college or university, you know, where I could study the art of manga properly, and that would lead to a career in it. But it was always staving off something for the future in a way. I was forgetting to live in a moment and just give things a go now. I think maybe it was just my I don't know, my psyche or whatever it's called, trying to shield myself from the truth that I was not a particularly great artist and that it was going to take a lot of work, and just staving off something for the future was just shielding myself from the truth. And also the thought that I had to be exceptionally good at Japanese before I was going to be able to actually write a manga. Well, I've decided that it's best just to get started. It doesn't matter if it's in English. I've actually met people here who want to help me translate it into Japanese. So, I guess there's no better time than the present for these things. Wow, we're just about getting a glimpse of the view that we're going to have from the top. That down there is the city of Miyako itself, and you can see the port that's down there, and also the outlet of the Hay River, I believe it's called. But yeah, can't wait to show you the view from the top of here. It's just going to be so spectacular. So let's stop gabbering and crack on. Be good if I could actually get my words out, but this has all been ad-libbed, so there is no script and there's no film crew. It's just me and the breeze. Works for me. Just caught a glimpse of the summit. That's where we're headed to, folks. So how do we tie this all together? The experience of living in Japan, why I'd want to stay here, why I want to continue studying Japanese, why I believe that really you should bank on trying to focus on living for the future rather than your dreams alone, shall we say, but also not focusing so much on the future that you forget to enjoy the present. Well, and obviously the illustration stuff. Well, as I say, the manga, I just got started. Actually, I started pretty much the minute that I got to Japan, trying to figure out what would the story be. And it started off with some extremely trite rubbish, quite frankly. Stuff about angels saving people and all this kind of nonsense. You know, it was just completely generic, kind of devoid of any real nuance crap, basically. Over time this became quite frustrating, that here I was saying that I was going to become this illustrator, storyteller and so forth, and all I could do was probably churn out fourth-rate crap. So it took quite a while to actually develop the idea, and yes, it did get frustrating at times. Alongside this, around about June of last year, I decided to tackle my fears about what little I knew about actually really properly drawing characters and so forth, and really start learning about how to draw anatomy correctly, or a lot better than what I had been able to do, and just really working as much as possible on improving my illustration skills. So facing fears head on, I suppose, was the medicine of the day. So yeah, working on the manga has been a real, at times, quite hard work, but I have actually really enjoyed the process despite those frustrations. Certainly developing the characters has been one of the most fascinating processes that I can't wait to share with you, but I'm waiting until I finish the very first chapter before I actually do that, because otherwise I'll just spoil parts of the story. But suffice to say, the ideas for one of the main characters, Saki, came out probably around about August, September time of last year, after a lot of deliberation over some of the basics of the storyline. And once I'd actually figured out, you know, some of the basic ideas around her character and her personality, you know, I always wanted her to be a little bit countercultural, certainly for Japan anyway. She might be seen as fairly tame in some regards in the West, but she would certainly be seen as a strong woman, shall we say, anywhere in the world. However, it was basically one afternoon. I'd finished all the classes at the particular school I was at that day, and I was studying away in my Japanese textbook, making some notes, and as has always been the case for me, I just drifted off and I started to just, you know, aimlessly doodle characters, and on one page I had been drawing up these various little skits between Lanma and Shippo-chan, Shippo from Inuyasha. And it was just something that was easy for me to draw, a stress reliever, shall we say, and a bit of cute fun, shall we say. And so I'd drawn Shippo with his, you know, trademark sort of bushy tail, and obviously his big clump of tied up hair that he wears behind his head, as it were. And yeah, then on the next page, you know, I'd been obviously doodling ideas for what Saki could look like for quite some time, and out of nowhere I basically clearly combined some of the aspects of Lanma, Shippo, probably a bit of Kodachi Kuno in there as well as other characters. And out came what was the first recognisable version of Saki. A little bit more realistic looking than perhaps my previous efforts, but it immediately clicked with me that this manga had to have a slightly more realistic approach to it, rather than being a sort of like an exaggerated manga aspect. So yeah, to actually see Saki was a real big breakthrough for me. I was then able to really sort of tie up some of the loose ends of the story. But the thing that really sort of changed it in a big way was the experiences that I was having here in Japan, and that's possibly why actually being here has been so fundamentally important to me, and why I want it to continue. I've worked in Miyako City for the last year, as I say, working in local schools, and sometimes I have to travel a little bit further afield within the city area, and one of those towns that I've been going to for the past year has been Taro. Now, Taro was very sadly affected very badly during the Higashi Nihon Daishinsai and the tsunami 10 years ago. Essentially the entire town was virtually obliterated, and certainly hearing the stories that the children and the youngsters themselves have told about it, various displays and so forth I've seen up in the school, it was a very moving experience, and it's profoundly affected me, shall we say. It made me sit up and realise that there was perhaps a story that needed to be told around, maybe not specifically based on 100% reality, but something surrounding it. And that's where essentially fusing that interest that I've always had in the environment and people and so forth, hence why I did geography at university, and previously I talked about, you know, how it was the great Hanshin earthquake of 1995 that we studied at school actually when it happened, and you know, it really engaged me about life and society here in Japan, and that's never left me. So I thought, how can I introduce those events into the manga? You know, the story was kind of there, but it needed something to tie it all together. And yes, it was working through some of the things that I thought about and learnt about with regards to what happened here 10 years ago as regards that tragic disaster, that the ideas for Future Saviours really began to solidify. And by December of last year, I cracked the story. I remember it quite clearly. I was actually driving back from Taro, or was it? Maybe it was somewhere else, but it was definitely after work one day. And I was driving through the brand new Inotsuyama tunnel, which basically links the coastal Miyako City to a little bit more inland, as it were. And the penny just dropped how to basically wrap up this manga, and how one little chink in the story didn't make sense, and I just suddenly realised how to bring it all together. And it felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders, that I had finally cracked how to tell an engaging story properly. And it ticked all the boxes as far as I was concerned. And then the next day I sat down at work, and I, for some reason, had only one class scheduled in that day. So for 7 hours of the day, essentially, I was at the desk doing a bit of Japanese study, but you can't study Japanese for 7 hours. You know, only so much will go into my brain. And so I literally sat there and typed up the entire synopsis for Future Saviours on 7 sides of A4 paper. Done. And I have to say, the feeling of actually getting it all out of me, and it all making sense, and it being exactly what I wanted to communicate at this point in time, was, yeah, it felt like a massive weight had lifted off my shoulders, that yes, I certainly could probably create an engaging story here. So, of course, obviously that left the other small matter of actually drawing it. Oh, we're almost there, less than a kilometre to go. So pretty much since January of this year, I have been working on doing the storyboards and so forth for Future Saviours, and yeah, it's definitely been a learning curve, and I've got some really good stuff coming up which is going to, you know, go into more detail about the character development process, because there's a little bit more than just me scribbling in a notebook and suddenly magically fusing a character together. And likewise, the storyboards, I've learnt a lot about actually how to improve that process, because there are a few things that I did just purely out of naivety and not having done it before, that I can actually optimise the process. So there's some really good stuff coming out. But yeah, I'm really very much looking forward to sharing the manga with you. It really speaks to the idea that the story was probably always staring me in the face for Future Saviours. It was all about, in a way, saving the future, not just in a literal sense, but also perhaps psychologically and so forth. That really the best thing you can do is not look back in life or dwell upon things and so forth, but just look forwards to what may yet come. You know, that contradiction which I talked about earlier on, about enjoying the moment, but, you know, obviously looking forwards as well. I guess maybe part of it is a reaction in me to, yes, of course, I like retro gaming and I enjoy watching older anime and films and so forth, but it just seems like sometimes there's a bit of an attitude to dwell and linger in nostalgia, even imagine nostalgia, you know, nostalgia that never really existed in the first place. And I feel that's quite a destructive place to live in on a long-term basis, because you'll never really truly recapture that moment that you're trying to reach back into, and it possibly never existed in the first place, as I say. So in a way, Future Saviours is going to be about two characters realising eventually that the only way that they can move onwards and save themselves, in a way, is to look forwards towards the future. So I guess, yeah, the story was staring me in the face the whole time, and I just hadn't even realised it. So yeah, I guess maybe it's also a reaction to some attitudes that you see on the internet, or I just expressed that the only future that exists is one that's in the vein of Blade Runner or Mad Max, and I don't really believe that. I believe there is still a tremendous amount of good in this world, and ultimately our daily actions will be a part of how to shape that. We can, you know, if we're rational enough, and God knows I'm not always, but we can, you know, make the better future that we all want and so forth, if we just all try that little bit harder. But also it speaks to something else about perhaps showing a side of Japan that's not often expressed, perhaps, certainly in the West, shall we say. You know, it's not all going to be like lost in translation. and it's not all going to be spiritual moments about finding yourself in the grounds of the Imperial Palace in Kyoto. So I guess it's a slightly nuanced story, but it's certainly one that I feel answers the question about what I'm actually going to draw, what am I actually going to tell the story about. And yeah, I'm actually very excited about it. So yeah, that's pretty much everything about Future Saviours. I guess in a way the title is extremely literal, because it also has another very simple dimension, and one that rather sappily and maybe foolishly honestly believe, but I kind of have this feeling that Future Saviours is going to be the thing that saves my future, because I have nothing that I'm going to be able to return to in the UK to afford even a half decent lifestyle when I return, because I'm never going back to my old career, and the job as an assistant English teacher doesn't exist in the UK, so I don't really have other skills to fall back onto at the moment. So I have to either become good at illustration and make some kind of success out of that, where maybe I do corporate work in the day, but in the evenings maybe I'm able to pursue the passion, shall we say. But ideally I know that never happens. Your day job just consumes all the hours, and you get home and you're knackered and you're tired, and you just don't have the energy to pursue those passion projects. So I just have to keep working hard here and make the very best of the time and space that Japan has given me, essentially. Wow, look at the views. So yeah, that's looking out towards the Pacific Ocean there. In a way, I'm looking forward to the descent, not just because it'll be a little bit easier going than walking uphill, but because I won't be recording this video and I can actually properly look at what's around me. But yeah, essentially that's kind of where I'm at with things, really. The other thing that I could end up doing perhaps is that as long as I can get my Japanese up to a good fluent level and so forth, maybe I can work as a translator or teacher of Japanese or any combination of those things. That would be quite exciting actually, because it would mean that I'd still be working with people. I guess all I can really do is just focus on the here and now, and just hope that in some way Future Saviours pans out as well as I hope it does. I guess climbing this mountain, or Mount Gassan today, is just a cheap metaphor really, isn't it? There's much about life that is like actually climbing a mountain. At times it can be arduous and hard work and a bit of a slog, but the view from the top when you actually finally achieve what you want is something that can't be beaten, quite frankly. And I guess that, I could say that things haven't always been completely straightforward in my life, but the thing is that you can't keep on looking backwards. You have to look forwards, because you can't change what happened in the past. That's been and gone, it's happened, and nothing will change that, quite frankly. Yeah, I guess that all comes down to that belief in the future again. And also there's something to be said about striving for things in life. I think the vast majority of us have to work hard at things, have to work all the hours that, whatever it is, sends us to be able to at least achieve some of our goals or aspirations in life. But then if you get given what you really want in life just by virtue or by luck or fortune, then you never really truly learn the value of what it is that you're working towards and appreciate the experience. It's very important to appreciate that sometimes it's important and essential in life to strive towards things. I have no idea whether things like Future Saviours or what I hope maybe one day I'll end up doing will actually happen. But I can only try, and you can only try doing the things that you want to achieve in life. So everything seems to always come back to that cyclical loop that I have with things at the minute, that is all about looking forward to the future and not trying to change what happened in the past. There is nothing that can be changed about that now, albeit there will be a great irony in that in Future Saviours. Only 100 metres to go. Wow, I'm looking forward to seeing this view. NHK transmitter with Terrabi Iwate. So that's what's up here. Gasan 455 metro, 455 meters. Okay, now one year in Japan. Unbelievable. It's quite emotional in a way, if I'm honest. It's not always been easy, but it's rarely been better. My home. So let me try and point out a few little things. So basically straight ahead, where my finger is pointing, that's where I live. You can see sort of like a little harbour down there, and you might even be able to make out the grey tsunami wall there, which I live behind. But yeah, there's just a little hill just here, and that's basically where I live. So I literally do look out on this mountain pretty much every day that I wake up here in Miyako. Of course over there is the main part of the city. You can see the Hay River there and the tidal gates that they're building there. But all around Miyako you can see the various tsunami walls protecting, or hopefully protecting, the city. Over there you can see Jodokahama Beach, which is truly beautiful. And the Sanriku coast just unfurls northwards. So I can see little spots like, in fact, just there you might just be able to see a brightish building just on the tops of the cliffs there. I think that's that mansion, or that strange building that we saw when I did the Amiga 1200 video a few months ago. The place that reminded me of Piccolo Chardin's mansion out of the Llama 1/2 manga. And also the anime. They did actually animate that arc, didn't they? Yes, and there's the tip of Yamoi down there. But way off in the distance, just underneath the cloud here, or just here actually, you can just about make out the peak of Mount Hayachin. I think that's how it's pronounced. The highest peak, well, second highest peak in Iwate Prefecture, second only to Iwate-san. So, or Mount Iwate. But yeah, and it's over those mountains in the distance that I have to traverse each time I want to go to the bright lights of Morioka, with its shops and cinemas and other things that Miyako doesn't necessarily have a huge amount of, but everything I need on a daily basis is really here. And, well, I guess my adopted hometown. But yeah, if it wasn't for me talking, you wouldn't hear a single voice up here. I guess I need to wrap up this video. It's been a bit of a rambly blog, but I felt like it was important to mark the occasion of at least being in Japan for a year. And I think the thing that I realised is that obviously I was looking for a bit more sense and a bit more purpose in my life, and certainly being here in Japan has provided that. Certainly, you know, sorting out future saviours has really been a step change. I suppose what I didn't really realise at the time when I stepped off that train at Toshimaen in Nerima, when I got to my first stopping point here in Japan in Tokyo, that I was stepping off the train with Saki and Hisao already stood right behind me. I just needed to look a little bit more closer and a little bit more inside myself to discover the story that I wanted to tell. So I think the next year is going to be a really exciting step change here in Japan. I'm looking forward to sharing more of it with you. As you can probably tell, I'm quite exhausted after that climb, but certainly the view has made it all worthwhile. Anyway, I guess that all remains for me to say is see you soon. Peace. 一番大切なのは人々がお互いを思い一緒に頑張ることです。そうすれば明るい未来を作ることができるはずです。私は今、次の世代の助けになりたいと思っています。